So Eskom has confirmed that it does not expect to implement load shedding over winter should losses remain below 13,000 megawatts. The utilities group CEO Dan Marokane says at worst, I'm repeating myself a bit here, but just to remind you, they're saying in the worst case scenario, we'll only get up to stage 2 of the power cuts. That'll amount to about 21 days or so of interrupted power supply. Let's speak now to energy specialist and Sinan Energy CEO, Mohamed Madhi. Mohamed, a very good evening to you. Good to have you on SABC News. So, no load shedding expected over winter, but T's and C's apply, right? So how realistic is the forecast issued by Eskom today?
Good evening, Michele, and good evening to the viewers. Look, I think the forecast is probably still realistic, given the fact that so many units are now coming back online, and given the history that we've had so far. So I think certainly the voice or the statements coming out of Eskom do reflect an increased capacity and increased availability of the system at the moment. So purely in that regard, I would say it's fairly accurate.
How fluid, though, or how stable, in fact, is the grid currently? Because you recall a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, one of the issues when we had seen an escalation in the frequency, especially regarding the implementation of the interruptions to electricity supply, load shedding, things would break down, units would break almost unexpectedly, and there'd be a sort of domino effect. How much have we changed, shifted perhaps from that scenario?
Unfortunately, that's exactly part of the problem. We have not yet changed that much, in the sense that Eskom can still not with certainty say that these plants are now operating and are not going to be breaking down. And in a way, it's also an unrealistic expectation because we have a very aging fleet, and so they are going to break down. I think the worrying thing for the public is that Eskom doesn't have the handle on when and if these plants are going to break down, these kinds of outages. And if they do, then we are going to see load shedding again. But I think one has to stress that the probability of that happening is now lower than it has been in the past. So, that's a good thing. And it's lower simply because we have a lot more generation capacity than we've had for a long time available.
And then that forecast by Eskom management today that in the worst case scenario, we're likely to see stage 2 load shedding for a maximum of about 21 days. What does that then tell us about the ways in which they've been able to stabilize the same grid?
I think they certainly, probably the same thing. They've been able to stabilize the grid by bringing more units online and also having a more focused maintenance program over the last year and a half, over the last 2 years, certainly since the Minister of Electricity has been appointed. But the issue is that if we have any semblance of reasonable economic growth, then Eskom is going to be severely tested. And so far they have not been severely tested because we have not had anywhere near the kind of normal growth that we were used to, several years ago. So the real test for Eskom is going to come under circumstances where we have increased economic growth. Right now, what they've done is been able to stabilize somewhat the electricity supply system for the current level of economic activity. But it says nothing about any increase in the level of economic activity.
Our line to you, Mohamed, is failing us slightly, but I do want to squeeze in one or two more questions before we let you go. And you mentioned economic growth. That brings me to the money. So on the best case load shedding scenario, Eskom says it forecasts that it might have to spend up to 700 million rand on diesel. That's for those open cycle gas turbines, right? On the best case scenario, that would include running the turbines until August of this year. Where will that leave Eskom's balance sheet?
So I think from Eskom balance sheet point of view, of course, it's quite a negative effect. It does mean that Eskom will have to recover more money over the next financial period, and then it would point to higher tariffs next year, maybe higher than anticipated. However, in the scheme of the overall country's economic well-being, it is money well spent. To be able to run the open cycle gas turbines, as painful as it is and as bad as it is economically for Eskom, it's certainly much better than not having power and having load shedding, because the load shedding effect on the economy is devastating, especially to small and medium-sized businesses, and especially to the manufacturing sector, who are hit the hardest when you have load shedding. So, spending the 700 million or thereabouts is a small amount relative to the damage that could be done if we had load shedding.
And lastly, there was a report in the Sunday Times, I think it was yesterday, regarding South Africa exploring the possibility of moving more towards nuclear, spending up to 60 billion rand, I think is the figure, on a nuclear build program. They're not ruling out, according to this report, perhaps speaking to experts in countries like Russia and China. Is this the right time to do it? And can the country afford to look at that sort of spend on energy?
I have to say emphatically no. Nuclear energy and nuclear power is expensive. And globally, nuclear power is not having the uptake that was forecast. When I used to be in the nuclear industry 12, 15 years ago, there was a great deal of enthusiasm about how much nuclear power is going to be taken up worldwide. Well, that has not happened. It's been replaced to a very large extent by solar, wind, and battery energy storage. The other thing we have to look at in this country is, we are always talking about baseload, and we get fixated on baseload, and sometimes for good reason. However, most of the power usage by the economic sector happens during the day, yeah.
Mohamed Madhi, I'm not sure I think we may have lost you slightly, but thank you so much for speaking to us. Mohamed Madhi is an energy specialist, also CEO at Sinan Energy, speaking to us about the energy or electricity forecast ahead of winter.